For the past 5.5 weeks, our group and myself have been researching about introducing vaccination to developing countries. There are a significant number of problems posed which need to be solved in order to enhance and save the lives of those living in the developing world. Today, we would like to focus on the problems posed on the manufacturing aspects of the vaccine industry. Vaccination, a biological preparation which improves immunity for a particular disease by injecting a weakened or killed form of agent that resembles a disease-causing microorganism. Vaccination is an extremely cost-effective way to save lives. Once a person is infected, the costs of treatment increase significantly. Post-infection treatment includes number of hospital visits, examination fees, surgery, and medication. Even in developed countries, such as the United States, numerous hospital visits pose as a great burden to the households. In developing countries, the burden is even greater, as they live on an extremely tight budget and many cannot afford such luxury. Hence, many simply do not have the option but to suffer and, in worst cases, die. Fundamentally, vaccine production requires a significant amount of investment for production facilities and research and development. Hence, it is extremely difficult for newcomers to enter the market, as vaccine manufacturing knowledge is extremely difficult to acquire in a short amount of time. Moreover, vaccine industry only accounts for less than 2% of the world's pharmaceutical market. Due to its nominal portion, many companies would rather focus on the pharmaceutical market instead. Moreover, vaccination market is highly regulated in every part of the world, as it could pose as a direct threat when developed with a fault. With such severe regulation, manufacturing costs increase significantly. Intensity of regulation and high fixed cost, manufacturers have extreme difficulty entering the market and prefer to enter the pharmaceutical market instead. Historically, with such high entry costs, many manufacturers were only able to enter the market with financial aid and assurance from numerous governments. Government provided direct subsidy for vaccinations or provided contracts that the public sector will purchase large sums of the vaccination once it has been developed. However, this form of global public sector financial aid was only possible due to uniform of vaccination required. During the time, majority of the population around the globe were not vaccinated for diseases such as measles, pertussis, and or polio. However, the globe coverage for these traditional vaccination reached over 70% of the world, and prices are relatively low, as fixed costs of production of these vaccines have been paid off a long time ago. The problems we face in this current era is related to vaccination development to specific regions in the developing world, such as Africa. Diseases which are specifically required for certain regions are difficult to develop, as manufacturers are hesitant to develop vaccination suited for certain areas. Without government aid, large number of diseases poses a great threat to the lives of those living in third world countries. In this presentation, the rest of our group will be providing two solutions which could enhance the current crisis regarding vaccination in developing countries.
Hello everyone, as David said, we're going to discuss about what is the best option for solving or mitigating the problems of manufacturers' insufficient benefit in the vaccine industry due to the fact that the problem impairs vaccine coverage in developing countries. Fundamentally, due to vaccine industry is directly connected with human health, it is one of the most restricted industry by law. Therefore, to initiate vaccine development, vaccine manufacturers need to pass through strict regulations and approval process. According to Hendrickson, manufacturing and vaccine maintenance validation test is essential. Also, Hendrickson argues that vaccination manufacturing has to be monitored to keep manufacturing process clinically clean and effective. However, Sloan insists that the long approval process and strict regulation raises the problem of vaccine insufficient benefit of manufacturers. Now, let's see what specific problems are. International vaccine manufacturing companies have to be approved by governmental regulation system, and in general it has complicated and time-consuming process. According to FDA, to produce vaccine, manufacturers need to pass through 3 approval process. As test subject groups get bigger from trial 1 to trial 3, from 1 to 100 to 10,000 to 1,000 to 10,000, it gets longer time, and even it takes long time to be approved by FDA. They encourage manufacturers to create commercial production capacity before their license is granted, which means the company has to consider substantial financial risk. In addition, FDA does not accept data from foreign clinical trials, which means the supplier must repeat comprehensive clinical trials in United States. Therefore, due to vaccine manufacturing inspection institutions pose strict regulation and obligatory clinical trials, and barriers is very high and risky. Now let's move on to solution part. As earlier we saw, regulatory approach is likely to decrease cost effectiveness in vaccine industry. To optimal manufacturers' benefit, streamlining regulatory process has to be done. The most important thing is to lower the entry barrier. Regulation tend to be set for larger corporation, and it is not always fit the small manufacturers. Implementing rules without consideration of small manufacturers have to change it. Secondly, as global trade relatively influences the vaccine productions, integrated international regulation has to be made to ease trade and lower the trade barrier in vaccine industry. We could find several potential benefits. Here's the things. Firstly, manufacturers will be encouraged due to reduction in production cost, and it will decrease consumer burden, and eventually individual benefit will be caused. This is end of my part, and we will see the second solution, which will be presented by Aron.
Thank you, Hun. And the second solution that we're going to discuss about is the economic help of governments. It is assumed that financial supply by the large organizations and governments are significantly essential to undeveloped countries. However, according to Mamani, financial aid by governments is not necessary in vaccine industries. The major manufacturers have earned $3.6 billion in 1999 to $9.9 billion in 2004 by selling vaccines globally. A subsidy is a money given by the governments to help an industry to keep their business stable. In other words, the need of subsidy in vaccination for disease reduces as disease become more infectious. If a disease is relatively more infectious than other diseases, the demand of people willing to be vaccinated increases. which means more vaccines are sold. While the supply of vaccine remains the same, the vaccine producers can have more profits. Therefore, less free ride effect occurs and lower subsidy is needed. Despite of these negative points of financial support, the positive outcomes outweigh the negative points. Nowadays, majority of developing countries are not able to have enough vaccine coverage for many people. Financial cost is one of the major problems these countries are facing. The World Health Organization, WHO, and Global Action Plan for Influenza Vaccines, GAP, was organized to evaluate the limitations of producing vaccines in developing countries. Additionally, Nene said that WHO is supporting 14 in developing countries for vaccination program. Hinman also mentioned that the compensation of vaccine for influenza management was increased from $8 to $18 by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Governments can provide subsidies to extend the local vaccine production. If local vaccine production is boosted, many benefits may occur into the communities. For example, the disturbance and time of distribution will be reduced. And there will be less demand of vaccine from other countries and industries, which takes longer time to bring vaccine into their country and until it reaches the private and public health systems. Then people can be vaccinated faster and safer than before. Furthermore, more vaccines can be supplied to suburb and potential cost will be saved. So these fundings by the governments are stimulated. Also, manufacturers should receive considerable and sustainable investments. The figure shows the health and industrial sectors can operate together with the support of government to achieve their shared goals, which is to produce better products with higher qualities and reasonable price. Cooperative industries and health policies are able to encourage local vaccine production. With the assist of government, such as tax reduction, soft loan, subsidy, and providing funds to healthcare, can produce a strong, productive, and competitive local firms. As a result, it can be concluded that financial support by governments and big communities in vaccine production has to be done because those strategies will work as a method for countries that want to activate the local production of vaccines. Several vaccine industries are not willing to produce more vaccines due to the lack of profits. However, with the support, manufacturers can research higher quality of vaccines and improve a wider prevention of disease. Consequently, maximization of social welfare, development of new vaccines, and expansion in vaccine industries will happen. In the end, numerous people will be able to avoid diseases. So now I'll pass it on to the next presenter, Ken.
Thank you, Aaron, for a nice presentation. So, as David have introduced, our group's main focus is the vaccine development to specific regions in the developing world. The manufacturers are hesitant to develop such specific vaccine for certain regions in developing countries because they lack financial benefit and have high risks. Hoon and Aron have posed possible solutions for the problem. The possible solution posed by Hoon is that the regulation system is too strict and the process is too complicated, and therefore the inspection process needs to be simplified. However, the opposite opinion exists. Hendrickson argues that the vaccination manufacturing has to be monitored to keep the process clinically safe and effective. However, Hun mentioned that the positive effect of simplifying the manufacturing process outweighs the negative opinion. The FDA's clinical trial phases are divided into 3 parts, which make the process long and complicated. Due to such complexity, the vaccine manufacturers are hesitant to develop new vaccine. Also, new manufacturers can hardly join the industry because the regulatory system is mostly set for large corporations. Thus, by streamlining the regulation, the production costs will be reduced. It will bring more vaccine supply to the world, and the developing countries will receive benefit from it. The other solution posed by Aron is that the government should support the vaccine manufacturers financially. There is negative opinion exists. Mamani believes that the financial aid by government is not necessary in vaccine industry because the manufacturers are receiving big enough benefit, which is 9.9 billion US dollars. However, Aron stated that the positive aspects outweigh the negative points. He mentioned that the WHO is supporting 14 developing countries. By providing government financial support, the organization can help the local vaccine production, and the benefit for the local communities will be maximized and the time of distribution minimized. The financial aid by the government can promote maximized social welfare and expanded vaccine industry, which ultimately lead to vaccine distribution for people who cannot afford for it. Thus, the scarcity of vaccine in developing countries will be solved. Our group believes that Aron's recommendation is the better one because it may bring more benefit than Hun's recommendation. Despite the negative opinions about the government financial aid, the benefits are huge and clear. It can expand the vaccine industry. The manufacturers will produce vaccine with lower price, but get higher profit for selling more, thus they will produce more new vaccine, and people will receive vaccine with lower price. The financial support by the government will be the best solution for the problem exists in the vaccine industry and satisfy those who are in need of vaccination. This is the reference list. And we will have some time for questions.